Inside this room, all of my dreams become realities, and some of my realities become dreams.
What in the wide, wide world of sports is going on here? Alive! It's alive! It's alive!
You are listening to The Wilder Ride, getting wilder by the minute. Here are your hosts, Alan Sanders and Walt Murray.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Wilder Ride Listeners Lounge, a podcast that's a sidecast to the main show that we did a couple of seasons ago. But instead of looking at a movie 1 minute at a time, we're looking at the life of someone we find interesting one moment at a time. I'm your host, I'm Alan Sanders.
I'm your co-host, Walt Murray.
Walt, Thanksgiving now in the rearview mirror. We're the week after, heading into December. Where is the time going, buddy?
Man, it is flying. I mean, this has been a crazy year.
As opposed to last year, which had its challenges, I know there's some this year. Last year felt like it just was dragging, and this year I needed to slow down. I need to do the Fred Flintstone. I want to put like my heels on the floor and just go, slow down.
It would be nice to be able to do that, wouldn't it?
Yes. Now, when we last chatted last week, we were talking about getting ready for the big feast. Well, now we're on the backside of it. Did you have a good one? Did you enjoy time with family and friends?
I did. Yeah, it was kind of weird. First one.
As a single dude, technically.
So, since all my fun this year. And so I went out of town and I got to see some snow, got to watch a minor league hockey game, got to meet the family of my new significant other. And Aww. So it was really crazy. It was good. I mean, it was a fast trip, long drive, and but we had a lot of fun. And so I think I've said before that I spent 9 years as a kid in Ohio, and I got to put my feet in Ohio dirt for the first time since 1979. So that was kind of cool. And so had a great time.
Excellent. Well, I was able to finish the sitting room for my beloved bride, and she came home, and I rarely see Susan cry tears of joy. Not that she doesn't have joy, but she's one of those people that she doesn't cry at movies a lot. She doesn't have that sense of, weeping. She's very strong. It made me just go, all right, I did an
That's a win.
I did a good thing.
That's a good one.
So felt good about that. A lot of work, but you know what? It paid off. She's happy. And of course, now we're gearing up for holidays, which means decorating more, which means getting ready for our annual Christmas party, which means getting ready for the kids to come. They're all coming for Christmas. So they'll be spending the night Christmas Eve and waking up with us Christmas morning. So it'd be kind of wild to have our girls and their significant others using our house as base of operations.
Yeah, that will be crazy. And, we talk about this, and it is amazing just how fast time goes. For me, it's almost like yesterday that my oldest two came to live with me and that my youngest was born. And here we are, adults. My kids basically stayed home by themselves and did very little damage to the house. So that was nice, and kept the dogs alive. And so you realize how fast that time goes, and it's kind of crazy. And now as adults, they're talking about, okay, what do we do? None of them this year are spending, Christmas Day with a significant other, but it just is kind of crazy how fast that time goes.
Just a little behind mine in terms of age, so they'll be there shortly.
Yeah. Yes, they will.
Here's the crazy thing. And it's wild because we talk about this a lot, my wife and I, about how it's so cool that we have adult children who now we're friends with. We knew, and we both, and thankfully we were eye to eye on this when we were raising them. We wanted them to be happy. We wanted them to experience things. We wanted to give them every opportunity, whether it was sports or music or art, whatever it was they had a passion for. We wanted to try to do what we could, sacrificing our own loves and passions to provide. But we always knew we were parents first. We were not their best friends. If they loved us, that's great. But you're not really a true parent until you wake up that day and your child tells you how much they just hate you.
Been there.
But when you do it right, not to say that, I'm not doing that. I mean, I'm sure we made mistakes along the way. Everybody, there's no such thing as perfect parenting. But I feel like we did it well enough. Now we're the friends. We literally like hanging out together. We'll go camping together. We'll go on, in fact, we're going to go on a family vacation this coming summer. And it was the girls that brought it up. They were like, we love the memories we made. We don't think about it at the time as kids. But now that we're semi-adult, full adult, however they want to call themselves, because a lot of them, they go, I hate adulting. I just want to go back to being a kid. But they said, looking back, they laugh more and more about the memories we created. It's not about whether or not we had the newest Xbox or whether or not we had the newest, gear or car or gadget. Those were cool along the way where we could afford. And obviously we try to give them things as they were growing because they all need clothes and stuff. But it's wild now. We get together and we talk about the stories, the memories.
Yeah, we were doing some of that today. My daughter had to, my oldest daughter, for one of her classes, had to write a 3-minute speech. And she chose to do that speech as a commencement address for my middle child who's about to graduate from high school. And so she had a presentation with a bunch of old pictures of her as a kid and, her drawn on herself on Sunday morning when we were trying to get out the door to church and, bluing her stomach with a highlighter and just all the crazy stuff that, they did. But it was almost like a step back in time looking at all those and just laughing about all the crazy stuff that at the time wasn't all that funny.
Well, it makes me, and I know we talked about it in the last episode about what we were thankful for heading into Thanksgiving. We're on the backside of it. Sometimes it feels like you're banging your head against the wall when you're in the moment as a parent and you're wondering, is any of this going to stick? Am I going to have a successful child? Will they figure things out? And you sometimes feel like you're not enjoying parenting. I hate to say it, but there's moments where you go, God, I'm tired. I'm so tired of being a parent.
Yeah.
It's been worth it now.
We all have those moments and parenting is a roller coaster ride. It's a insane asylum. It's it's almost like getting on a roller coaster and not strapping in.
Mm-hmm.
And you just spend 18 to 20 to 25 years holding on for dear life. And then you make that transition as they move into adulthood where you are their friend and you're giving advice. And I even, with my kids at times say, okay, what do y'all think about this? Where before I'd just say, this is the way it is. Mm-hmm. So they get a little experience of what adulting is all about. So yeah, it's and this time of year, it's good to kind of take a step back and pause and remember those things and remember what's really important in life, because all the other crap, it's important, but it's not the most important.
Right. I think the quality times we spent, the adventures we went on, whether it was the gymnastics overnight trips because of regional competitions or the soccer trips or the trips to the beach, the trips to the mountains, things where we thought, well, we're shoehorning in as cheaply as we can without trying to scrimp, but you're trying to, you're not staying in, luxury resorts. You're not staying in 5-star hotels, but you're trying to make it fun. It's great to hear that was all that it's all coming due. It's like we paid it forward to ourselves. We did all these things. And now hearing about it from their perspective, it just, maybe this is just what happens when you get older. It starts making me feel like, okay, I did an okay job. I can feel okay with what I did. I know I made mistakes along the way. Everyone does, but I feel good.
Yeah. And you get to that point where you kind of go, okay, yeah. And none of us are ever going to say, yeah, I got it right. I nailed it, 100%. But you realize that there's more good than bad. And that even some of the stuff that you're like, shit, that's going to come out in counseling one day. Even that stuff wasn't quite as bad as you thought.
Yeah. So as we're heading into the holidays, you and I, we only have a few more episodes left, which is kind of wild. We're going to take time off again for the holidays. We'll take a couple of months and enjoy time with family and friends and the coming of the winter and the new year. It just made me think about our history and our what we've done so far in our lives. And you and I, we're putting a capstone on 4 years now of this podcast.
That's crazy, isn't it?
And it's crazy because we start off with one kind of format. COVID made a shift to a little bit of a different format. I still want to get back to breaking a movie down. I think that's always a lot of fun.
Absolutely.
But we've also learned that we don't have to be necessarily as regimented, and sometimes life happens, and you know what? We still have our listeners and we love them.
Yeah, absolutely. And every podcast I'm sure says, hey, we have the best listeners, but I think we have the best listeners. I just love how people reach out and all the stuff that gets posted in the listeners group. And it really is just an amazing group of people.
Absolutely. Well, we're talking a little bit about history and nostalgia. We just got done with Thanksgiving, heading into the holidays. There is nobody else I could have thought of to imagine to bring to our stage tonight, but a guy who knows so much about American, specifically Western history. I mean, he has a job as a historian at one of the greatest art museums in the country, the USA Today Reader's Choice Award for 2020 and 2021 for the best art museum in the country, the Booth Western Art Museum. You and I are going to get a chance to have Jim Dunham for an hour, just us chatting.
Yeah, and Jim is a great guy. He's somebody who I have really enjoyed. When he was on with us before, it was like having a museum dumped into your head. I mean, it was amazing. So when we were talking about where do we end our season, this was one of the names that came up, and I'm really glad that Jim's able to join us tonight.
All right. Well, Walt, you and I have chatted just about long enough. It's high time we let a professional storyteller onto the stage with us. Folks, put your hands together and let's welcome to our stage, Jim Dunham. Jim, welcome to our listeners' lounge. How are you?
Well, thank you. I'm doing good.
The last time we had you on, we were using your expertise in the world of cowboys and cowboy history for an analysis of Blazing Saddles. But what we're doing with this season is we're actually interviewing folks. So we get to make you the target of our questions for the next hour.
And target is right.
That's right. That's right.
So we always want to start off with sort of as far back at the beginning of the story as makes sense. You and I, we've known each other for many, many, many years, get a chance to do shows together and both on stage and on the radio.
I know. Yeah. We were in Arsenic and Old Lace together. We were in The Rainmaker together.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we do stories that won the West every week on the radio.
I know.
And in all that time, you and I have exchanged a lot of stories, but let's start for you. When did you realize the Old West was something you were drawn to? A lot of boys growing up, they want to play cowboys and Indians, but then they outgrow it and they go on to other things. You stayed stuck in cowboy mode.
The first thing that really got me interested was watching the Davy Crocket Show that Walt Disney had on The Wonderful World of Disney. And this would have been the 1950s. And this was back in the old black and white days of television. And it was a great, entertaining show. And so I went to the library, and this was the difference, is that most kids my age, grade school, high school age, they enjoyed those shows as well, but they went to school and they played basketball or track and field or a chess club or whatever it is. And so they did all of that. And they just enjoyed the shows for what it was. They just enjoyed the TV program. I went to the library and I said, I just saw this show on Davy Crocket. Do you have any books about who he really was? And of course, they said they were thrilled because nobody had ever come in and done that before. And they said, "Oh yeah, we got lots of books." And of course, there were books like 13 Days of Glory, which takes him to the Alamo and he gets killed at the Alamo. I started reading the real stories, and I thought, "Oh, the real stories are more interesting than the fiction stories." And I was literally hooked. And from that time, I kept wanting to know the story behind the story. I wanted to know what these guys were like. And so really it was 1955. And in 1955, there were two television shows that hit the air within 9 days. Now, I was born in 43. So I'm just a kid in 1955, and I'm watching these shows with my dad, who liked Westerns on television. And the first one that hit the television in 1955 was The Life and Legend of Wyatt Earp, with Hugh O'Brien playing Wyatt Earp. 9 days later, Gunsmoke hit television. It had been on the radio for quite a few years. We were big fans of the radio Gunsmoke, but William Conrad did not sound fat on the radio. Great radio voice, but he was not the right fit for the TV show. But we fell in love with those shows. They were the beginning of what we call the adult westerns, not adult like pornography, but adult like stories meant for older people. And we loved these shows, and that was really the beginning with these TV shows. And in the 1950s, 1960s, there were over 30 westerns a week. In a single week, watching television, you could see Shane and High Noon, Have Gun Will Travel, Rawhide, Sugarfoot, Bronco, Lane, Colt 45, Track Dump, Bonanza, Big Valley, The Virginia, The Rifleman, Bat Masterson, Wyatt Earp, Gunsmoke. Every single week. Incredible.
Not that you have them memorized or anything.
So that was the beginning. And one of the major things about those shows was most of those shows had a gunfight. Those early adult westerns, they found out that one of the most exciting things is to have the bad guy and the hero face each other and have a shootout, have a gunfight. And so, Matt Dillon or whoever it was told the bad guy he was under arrest. And the bad guy said, "I'm not going." And he says, "Okay, well, anytime you're ready, go for your gun." And of course, then the good guy would outdraw him and shoot him down. And then he was buried in Boot Hill. So around the late 1950s, a new sport took off that had not existed before, and that was the sport of fast draw. And the idea was to go buy a gun, the old cowboy-style gun, single-action army, get a holster, and then practice and see if you could outdraw Matt Dillon, outdraw James Arnaz, outdraw, all of the TV guys. And clubs were started all over the country. And in 1958, I joined the Illinois Peacemakers Fast Draw Club that met at a shooting range. It was a sporting goods store gun shop called Bell's Gun Shop in Franklin Park, Illinois, not too far from O'Hare International Airport. And the guy who taught me, a fellow by the name of George Virginis, went on to become a showman and also wrote books about fast draw and guns. And it was kind of like if you had never touched a golf club and you're a teenage boy, you've never ever touched a golf club, and then along comes Arnold Palmer, Jack Nicklaus, or Tiger Woods and says, "Let me show you how to hold this in your hands. Let me show you how to stand. Let me show you how to swing." And the result is you would start off not having any bad habits. So the guy who taught me was one of the best in the world. It meant that by the time that I was, out of high school, I was considered one of the fastest guns in the country because I had literally been taught by the best, and I had practiced and we shot. And at that time, we were shooting a paraffin bullet, not a live bullet. And how we first started out, we would buy canning wax, like the kind you used from a grocery store, canning wax to do canning. And then you take your shell, and all it has is a primer in it. It's got a shotgun primer. And you would use the shotgun primer like a cookie cutter. And you'd cut through the wax and fill the front end of that shell with about a half an inch of paraffin. Now, what that meant is that you could face the target. They developed a thing where the target had a light on it. It was hooked up to clocks that were calibrated in hundredths of a second. Somebody who was the judge who ran the clock would say, "Shooter ready." You'd stand on a line 20 feet from the target. It was usually a metal plate target or a plywood target. And if you were ready, you said ready, or you couldn't touch your gun. You had to have your hand like about 4 inches or so from the holster of the gun. And you said ready or set. And then at random, the clock would go on. The light would go on, usually between 2 and 5 seconds. The light would go on. Once the light was on, the clock was rolling, and you had to draw, cock, aim, fire, and the paraffin bullet had to slam against the target and either bounce back or squish and flatten itself. So what we were able to do then is turn to the person next to us and say, "I can draw a gun. I can see the information, draw the gun in, 35 hundredths of a second or 40 hundredths of a second, whatever it was, and clubs all over the country began to do that. And then they started having local contests and regional contests and then national contests. The national contests were, the first one was held at Knott's Berry Farm in California near Anaheim. And that was before Disneyland was built. And then they went to Las Vegas for quite a few years. And by the 1960s, this had become a national sport with lots. It was it's a minor sport. It's kind of like racquetball. Okay, now a lot of people play racquetball, but when's the last time you saw a television production of racquetball?
Not since the second year of ESPN when they didn't have anything else to show.
It's a minor sport. So fast draw competition was a minor sport, but it was very popular. By the 1960s, there were clubs all over the country. In 1961 was my freshman year at the University of Colorado, and I was art majored from 1961 to 66 in Boulder, Colorado. And I joined the Boulder County Fast Draw Club, the Boulder County Sidewinders Fast Draw Club, and all through college I shot fast draw, and I was in my sophomore year. And I was sitting in the cafeteria of the dormitory where I was the resident dormitory, Baker Hall. And my friend Bob Kellogg was across from me, and I said, "Bob, I need an easy class. I got too many hard classes." He said, "Why don't you take an acting class?" I said, "That would be fun." Now I had done theater. I had never done theater in high school, but I did. I was on the debate team, so I was used to standing in front of people and speaking in front of people. So I took an acting class and fell in love with theater. Just fell in love with it. And by the time that I was through, I had as many credit hours in theater as I had in art. Actually wound up with a dual major. My first play was Rashomon, and the teacher of the class, of the acting class, was the director of the theater at University of Colorado. And he had one of his actors, they were getting ready to do the play, one of his actors broke a leg. Now, if you say to somebody, break a leg,
that's generally a good thing.
That's good luck,
right?
Unless you actually break a leg. And this guy had actually broken his leg. And so Mr. Sheldon Faulkner came to me and he said, "I've been watching you in class and doing your little bits and stuff. Would you mind learning the lines and doing the part of the deputy in Rashomon?" And I said, "No, I'd love to." Well, once I got done with that, I was hooked. And of all the plays I probably did about 14, 15 major productions at the university. I think of all the ones I did, that my favorite was doing the stage manager in Our Town. That was Thornton Wilder's Our Town was my most fun production. But I did Scrooge and in A Christmas Carol, and just Three Men on a Horse. The Music Man, did a whole bunch of plays while I was in college. And so the next thing was, after school, I went out to California, and my original plan was to continue my art training. There was a school, Los Angeles Art Center School, and I was going to go take some art classes and make a living as a commercial artist. And my mother, by the way, was a very fine watercolor artist. So I grew up in a home in which there was painting and art all the time, and I used to practice and do it. And so while I was out there getting ready to go to the art school, one of my actor friends was at UCLA, and he was getting a master's degree in cinematography because he wanted to get in the movie business. His name was Dwayne Hartzell. He went on to become a film editor for Walt Disney. That's how he spent his career. And he said, "You ought to go talk to the movie people about how good you are with a gun." I go, "Yeah, you just call up the movie people and say, 'Hey, I'm good with a gun. Let's get together.'"
Hi, movie people. I'm Jim.
Yeah. And my friend Dwayne said, "Now think about this." He says, "I am taking courses in the University of California, UCLA, and I am studying theater. My teachers are all connected, big guys in the movie industry." He said, "Let me make some phone calls." Well, he got me an interview with a producer by the name of Barry Coe at 20th Century Fox. I went on the interview. He said, "Let's see what you do." And I put my guns on, started spinning and twirling and flipping and doing fast draw. And Barry Coe said, "You want a job?" And I said, "In the movies?"
Yes.
And he said, "Here's the deal." He said, "I am in charge of the studio tours. We have trams of tourists that come in, and they take a tour of the sets. We have like 20 sound stages. At that time, just off of Pico Boulevard, I bet 20th probably had 150, 200 acres of land at that time, and they had 20 some sound stages. Some of those sound stages were beautifully decorated in the outside. They had done Hello Dolly, and as you entered the studio, there was cobblestone roads, and there was an old park with all of the fixtures of turn of the century New York. All the facades of the studios were New York at the turn of the century. I mean, it was fabulous. You drove into the studio, and it was just like, arriving in New York City in 1900. It was fabulous. And they had one of the best Western towns. The only one I think that was better was Paramount. Paramount's Western town was probably the best of the businesses out there. But anyway, but Barry Coe he said, we've got a group of stuntmen, about 5 or 6 stuntmen, and they put on a show, and they demonstrate stage fighting and high falls and stuff. And he says, since you have theater background, you can MC that show. You can shoot guys off the roof. You can demonstrate your gun tricks and spinning and twirling. And then, since you're under contract, we do it like 4 shows a day, and each one lasts half an hour. And since you're on the set, or since you're on the lot, and you're under contract, if we have actors who need to learn how to do that, need tips on how to do gun handling, you're there to help them. So I said, this is like a gift of God, is what it was. It really was. It was just absolutely wonderful, and I absolutely loved doing those years. And how I had first started doing shows, the theater people in Colorado had come to me, and they said, we get all these phone calls of people that want to have programs. Do you want to put together some kind of a program? And when somebody calls the theater to see if we have sword fighters or whatever, we'll say, call Dunham and see if he's got a show. And I did at that time put a show together about the American Indians, American Indian dance music and culture. And then I did a show on the gunfighters. And I actually had a funny show, which is all basically comedy and with some gun tricks, but it was all for jokes. It was set up for jokes. I did that for nightclubs. And I did it as for the Ice House in Pasadena a number of times. And then I did it as a warm-up on the road for music people like Jerry Jeff Walker, and worked with Hoyt Axton, with Vassar Clements, with Willie Nelson, and I basically was a warm-up for when they did concerts, mostly with Jerry Jeff Walker, who wrote Mr. Bojangles. And so I had that show. And then I had a show that was for like scholarly stuff, for like colleges and universities and banquets and conventions that wanted a serious comparison of what the Old West was like. So I had funny stuff and serious stuff. Most of the time, it was like a banquet show kind of thing where it had a little bit of everything. It had gun tricks, it had some jokes, and then it had a lot of historical information. And I was already doing that while I was in college. And so I was ready for when Mr. Coe said, do you want a job at 20th Century Fox? Because I already had done something similar to what he was asking me to do. Pretty cool. All
right. You've gone 14 and a half minutes straight. not that I'm keeping track.
Yeah. Now, my wife says, ask a simple question to get a pageant.
No, this is why we're at the end of our year. We knew we wanted to save some of our best guests for last. And I was like, you know what? We just have to ask 2 or 3 questions and go. Yeah. Well, I want you to get a word in edgewise. I know you listen a lot, but we're kind of at Jim, his first foray into 20th Century Fox and Hollywood.
Yeah. And I've read a few of the histories of the movie industry and that world out there. Who were the main players in the cowboy movies at that time? What actors would you have worked with?
Well, first of all, my first day in Hollywood was 1967. Okay, so when people say, "Did you teach John Wayne how to handle a gun?" I always say, "Yeah." In 1929, when we were making Stagecoach, I told, "How old do you think I am?" So I was at a time in which the latter end of the westerns were still popular. We still had the Virginian, Jim Dury. And I did a show with Jim Dury, and we still had we still had Hugh Uliger. I worked with him, and Robert Culp did the thing with him, and so we had a few. But basically, most of the people who made westerns had already been through the teaching process of how to handle guns. My connection was really people who weren't famous, and the people who needed to have, maybe they were the bad guys, but all of the famous people were taught by other people. The two main guys that were the early advisors for Western movies were Rod Redwing, who was an Indian fellow who taught. He worked with the Alan Ladd when he did taught Shane, and then Arvo Ojala. And Arvo Ojala worked with Jim Dury and James Arnaz and all of those Warner Brothers guys that did, Maverick and Bronco Lane, Cheyenne. All of those shows that were Warner Brothers shows were taught. The teaching was Arvo Ojala who did that. So I was late on the scene, and my contribution was pretty much just with the studio tour shows.
One thing I do find interesting, and this will get us a little bit sidetracked, but I did want to ask you about it. Even now, Westerns tend to endure. There aren't as many as there used to be. But some of the most popular movies over the years have been Westerns, like Tombstone and others. And I know you have some association with Tombstone. We'll ask you about that in a few minutes. But what do you think it is that spans generations that is so appealing about the Western?
Well, first of all, it's a good narrative. It's a good story. And that's one of the things we say about the Booth Western Art Museum is that the common denominator of Western art is its storytelling. And, no matter how good an abstract painting is or a non-objective painting is, basically it's appealing to your emotions for color and shape and design. But it's an emotional experience, but it isn't storytelling. You look at Western art and you have a burial going on at the end of a stampede, and the cowboys are burying their friend who got killed in the stampede. That's a story. And the stories that are told by the Westerns do two things. First of all, they allow you to live in a time frame that you don't get to experience. And I think the same thing is true of like Knights of the Round Table, King Arthur, and stories that are of that era. If you have a story that deals with that costume era, then you get to live a story that is in an era that you yourself did not live. And the second thing is that they are traditionally good overcomes evil. And in some stories, you especially in if it's all set in a modern day police story, for example, you got criminals and they're fighting the police, and the police are taking the bad guys. Many of your shows today don't end with the good guys winning. In fact, in many of the shows, evil continues to survive at the end of the show, partly so they can do a sequel. I mean, they allow the evil to live so that they can come back and make a second 2 or 3 movies based upon the evil returning. Historically and traditionally, Westerns, the hero is a good guy and overcomes evil, and at the end, evil is defeated. And I think that's real much a part of that the popularity of it. I've had people say to me, they say, if you had lived in the Old West, do you think you would have been a gunfighter? And I've thought about that a lot. And I am convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt that if I had walked the board sidewalks of Dodge City, Kansas in 1870, or the dusty streets of Tombstone in 1881, there's not a doubt in my mind that I would have been Tombstone, Arizona's leading expert in Elizabethan sword fighting techniques. People would have come up to you in 1880 and said, "Gee, it's too bad you weren't born 100 years ago. You'd have been a great sword fighter." Mm-hmm. Because my love is the history. My love is the research. If I had lived back then, I wouldn't have been a gunfighter. I would have been a historian of Knights of the Round Table.
Jim, when we're talking about this, and it's a great question Walt asked, I'm going to dovetail on it. It's not just Americana or the stories that Americans are drawn to with the Western Europeans are just as drawn to the stories of the West.
Yeah, they love it, and that's because of the movies. That's the movies have allowed them to live in those adventures. And I would have Germans especially. Can you imagine now if you were born if you were born in 1830 in Germany, look what you lived through. You lived through World War II. You're not Hitler's not your hero.
You mean 1930, not 18.
1930. Yeah. I'm way back. If you were born in 1930, 1935, 1940, and you can't embrace Hitler. You can't embrace the war. You can't embrace your version of it, your thing. So you look around and say, what can I love? What can I get involved in? And here comes, Clint Eastwood in those Italian spaghetti westerns, and they're just entertaining as all get out. They embrace them,
Mm-hmm.
And they have clubs. They all dress up in costume and get together. The only problem, and I've been to those clubs. When I was in the Army, I was stationed in Kerchjones, Germany, which is just a few kilometers from Frankfurt. And I found out about this Wild West Club, and I went to the Wild West Club, and I did a performance for them and got to meet them all. And they have like a saloon. They built like an old Western saloon with swinging doors and a bar. And they got guys dressed up like Indian chiefs. They got guys dressed up in Civil War uniforms, both sides. And they got cowboys, and they got all kinds of characters, military guys. But it just seems strange because a guy walks through the swinging doors. He's got a full headdress of eagle feathers, and he says, "Guten Tag, was ist Geist in the Lost House?" What's is Lost in the Ghost House?
Almost like a Mel Brooks film.
Yeah, it was exactly. The real experience was like a Mel Brooks movie. Yeah, it really was.
Well, the other thing is, and sometimes I think we in America take it for granted, is the vistas of the West. And there's so many ways that you can look at the West, from the extreme Southwest all the way through to maybe even more of the Colorado, and then more in the central to north and the mountain areas. All of that was plumb for Western tales.
Yeah, well, we are restricted in what we can do. Even if we're in a car, you can only go forward. You can't go sideways. You can't go, and you got to obey the laws. You got to obey the rules. Everything is close. There's houses everywhere. There's people everywhere. And you think, okay, a cowboy on a horse, he can swing his horse 160 degrees in a circle, go off in any direction he wants to, and have total freedom. Now, the reality is that most of those cowboys were employed and working for somebody and working for wages, and it wasn't an easy job. It was hard work. But the sense of freedom was a reality that even they thought of at the time. Most of us do not think of our lives and the jobs we have as something that people will remember, that people will write about us and think about us and remember us. Maybe actors do, but most people don't. Most people who are clerks and pharmacists and bankers and lawyers, they just are doing their job, but they don't think of themselves as special. The cowboy, the man on horseback, the cowboy would get to Dodge City, and he would get these paperback novels. He'd get these dime novels that were adventure stories about him, adventure stories about guys on horseback coming up the trail with cattle. And he'd say, the man on horseback, the cowboy, wears a bib front shirt and a bright silk red bandana and a big sombrero that is a beautiful white sombrero, whatever. And he would read that and he'd go, I don't have that. And he'd run out and buy that stuff. He would go to the general store in Dodge City, Kansas, and buy up the stuff that the book said he was wearing, because he wanted to fit in to the romantic image. He had a sense of the romantic image even while he was doing it, in a way that most careers don't have. Most people don't have that sense.
I know we're kind of jumping around, but we want to kind of tap into not only your history, but where you work and some of the things that folks that may be visiting Northwest Georgia with the Booth Western Art Museum. There is a romanticism, as you said, of what the West is in some of maybe the earlier movies and books, and then there's the reality of the West.
Right.
How do you balance that? Because there's a lot of people who want to believe that the West is what they see in the movies, and some of it is, but a lot of it's not.
And there were some times where they did debunking movies, where there were some very dark films that were made that were kind of anti-Westerns. We love Tombstone and we love Val Kilmer's portrayal of Doc Holliday, but there was a film called Doc, and that film that was called Doc was horrible. It made Doc and Wyatt Earp into evil, wicked people, and it was really not very satisfying. It was a very disappointing movie. And there was a series of books that came out that were anti-Western. A lot of it was done during the Vietnam War period, where people were protesting against anything American, anything about America was bad, everything Americans were evil. And there was a whole bunch of these kind of anti-Western things. But now the good news is that none of them were successful. None of them became popular. Some of them were on the edge. Little Big Man, for example, was kind of it was anti-Custer, anti-Indian Wars period white people. It was anti that, but it wasn't so strong as to keep you from enjoying the fact that
Dustin Hoffman.
Dustin Hoffman.
Okay, he was the lead in the movie, and Chief Jan George was the Indian, and he did a wonderful job. So even though it was anti-army, anti-America, it was not so strong that you hated the movie. It was still fun, right on the edge.
So when we look at the Westerns, Jim, how accurate are the stories that we kind of hold in our American mind as, you know, the good guys and the bad guys, the cowboys and the Indians? How accurate are those stories and those ideas that we have?
Well, first of all, the early films made no attempt to be authentic. I mean, almost all of your early movies have really they were just entertaining and they were fun, but they weren't trying to give you a true picture of the frontier and what the West. Most of them were just fluff. William S. Hart did a movie called Tumbleweeds, which we talked about the opening of the Oklahoma land rush, and that had some authentic qualities, but most of them were just absolutely fiction. In fact, I've had people say, "Didn't Wyatt Earp work as an advisor on Westerns?" And I said, No. Wyatt Earp died in 1929. In 1929, you didn't have people looking for advisors on Westerns. They weren't interested in being authentic. They weren't, and it wasn't until 1931 that Walter Houston appeared in Law and Order. That was the first movie about Wyatt Earp that made any attempt to tell the true story, and it was pretty good. But every movie is wrong. Every movie does, cut corners. They cut corners. And Tombstone is a perfect example. Tombstone probably does a better job of portraying the history of the OK Corral than any of the other movies. But in Tombstone, after the OK Corral is over, 3 men are killed, 3 men are wounded, 3 men run away. It happens about 3:30 in the afternoon, October 26, 1881. Right? Within minutes, you've got Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday in the Oriental Saloon. They hear a shot, and Virgil comes in wounded, and he's been shot with a shotgun in his left arm, and he'll be crippled in his left arm. And then shortly after that, he's in the billiard hall, Campbell and Hatch's billiard hall, playing pool with Morgan, and the back rear window explodes, and the shotgun fires through it, and Morgan falls dead on the pool table. And it all happens on the same night, and it's raining, and Wyatt Earp walks out, and the rain's coming down, and there's blood on his hands because he's been holding his brother. And I called Kevin. I read the script. This was before the movie was made, and Kevin Jarre had sent me the script to read and criticize. I read the script, and I called Kevin up, and I said, "Kevin," I said, "you know that the gunfight takes place in October, the wounding of Virgil Earp takes place in December, and Morgan Earp isn't killed until the middle of March." I said, "That's 6 months apart." He says, "Jim, we're just making a movie." I don't have time. We got to compress it. Everything's got to be.
What's cool is when you do that is the general facts of Virgil and Morgan and the death of Morgan and Virgil being wounded. That's all accurate.
That's all accurate.
It just didn't happen in one night.
Now, there's a couple things that didn't happen. For example, he's got Doc Holliday killing Johnny Ringo. Okay. But I called him up and I said, I believe that Doc Holliday was in Pueblo, Colorado the day that Johnny Ringo was killed, because I think there's evidence that he had a court trial for a bunco charge in Denver, Colorado. And I think he was in court with his lawyer. And so Kevin Jarre said to me, he said, "Well, who killed Johnny Ringo?" I said, "Well, we don't know. We don't know who killed Johnny Ringo." I said, "I think it might have been Buckskin Frank Leslie." But I said, "Nobody knows." In fact, the official coroner's report said they thought it was suicide, but I don't think it was suicide either. I think he was killed. All right. So Kevin Jarre says, in other words, you don't know, do you? I said, well, no, I don't. He says, well, if you don't know, it's going to be Doc Holliday, because that's the best story.
Mhm.
That's the best narrative. Anybody else kills Johnny Ringo doesn't have the satisfaction of the conclusion of the story that it has if Doc Holliday does it. Doc Holliday has to be the one who kills Johnny Ringo. I said, okay, I understand what you're doing. It makes it for a good movie, but it probably is not good history. But he says, well, we're just making a movie.
Well, and it allows us to have one of the best lines of the entire movie.
Oh, yeah.
Val Kilmer says, Johnny Ringgold, it looks like somebody just walked across your grave.
I know. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Many of the lines, by the way, are from the court trial. There was a 30-day court trial that followed the gunfight. And it's so much like real life today. First thing that happened after the gunfight was over, the police department arrests the Earps and charges them with police brutality. I mean, they had to go to court and get lawyers. And Wyatt hired Thomas Fitch, and they spent this 30-second gunfight is followed by 30 days in court testifying as to what really happened in that 30 seconds. And of course, the good news for us is that all of that testimony is recorded. It's printed in a book called the OK Corral Inquest, and you can read what everybody said. And in that, it talks about when Ike Clanton ran up to Wyatt Earp and said, don't shoot me, don't shoot me. And Wyatt said, this fight has commenced. Get to fighting or get away. Now, you wouldn't think that a person would use the word commenced in the middle of a gunfight, but we know he said that because in court, he said it, and witnesses heard him say it. And the same thing is true when Frank McLaury points his gun at Doc Holliday. He says, I think I have you now, Holliday. And Holliday says, blaze away, you're a daisy if you do. It was in the court records. It was recorded in the court records. So we have the court records, and we have two newspapers. We have the Daily Epitaph, and we have the Daily Nugget. And both newspapers covered the trial and covered the story. And so between the three things, we can pretty well accurately figure out what happened in that 30-second gunfight.
Now we're staying on Tombstone. There's a lot, and Walt mentioned that a lot earlier because we know of your affiliation with it and the things you do. And we're going to get to something that I love you do, which is a recreation. But one thing I do enjoy about the movie is the language, the fact that they did use a lot of the terms or a lot of the terminology of the day. Like, skin that smoke wagon, or
I know. Another one
things
that's
that
like
you wouldn't normally hear.
No, and True Grit does that too. True Grit, if you watch True Grit, and they do the same thing, and they
not the John Wayne True Grit.
Yeah, well, even the John Wayne, but especially the later one.
Yeah,
the later one, and
the one with Jeff Bridges was really,
and they don't say, I'll go down there and get that guy. They say, I will go down there.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't.
No contractions. There's not many.
No contractions in the entire movie.
They had a lot more time back then.
That's right.
They didn't need contractions.
That's right. Didn't need contractions. So.
But I think I like that because it goes to show that even gunfighters and saloon owners and just the layperson still had a bigger range of language and the use of language than I think we do today.
That's right. Oh, by far. Yeah. Yeah. It's real sad how we got people who can't even write cursive. I mean, we literally, everything now is you pushing little buttons with your thumb, and it's real sad to get away from the use of language. There's no television and there's no movies, and so all of those towns had theater, and we had the Shefflin Hall. Now the movie Tombstone shows them in the birdcage, and the birdcage was an entertainment thing but it was a little later than the time frame of Earp. But they did have Shefflin Hall, and Shefflin Hall did Shakespeare in the 1880s. They had Shakespeare, and Shakespeare was very popular in those towns of the Old West because people loved language and they loved theater. And if you don't have a movie and you don't have television, you don't have radio, live theater is what you go to. And you got, now think about it, your town is dominated by young single men who have money. Okay, because that's a
bad recipe right there.
Because it's a mining town. It's a silver mining town. The average cowboy is making $1 a day. The average miner is making $7 or $8 a day. Okay, so he gets an apartment. Maybe he shares it with a couple other miners. But there's one thing you don't do if you've got that money. You don't cook. So restaurants thrive. They had French cuisine. They had all gourmet restaurants. One of the most popular thing was oyster. They loved oysters, and they had oyster bars and mixed drinks. They didn't just drink beer and whiskey. They had all kinds. The gin fizz was extremely popular in Tombstone, and so you got young single men, and they go to theater productions, they go to music productions, and they go to restaurants. And now, did they go to houses of ill repute? Yeah, sometimes. But you have to live 12 months out of the year, so you're not there every night. At least I don't think so.
Well, I've been able to read a couple of books on Tombstone and in the West, Wyatt Earp, and one of the things that amazes me is some of the maps from the time and how big some of those towns were.
Oh yeah,
I think a lot of times from the movies we just get the idea that it's that one facade, right through Main Street, and that's it. But there was a lot more to those. There was a lot of streets
and a lot in Tombstone. You had quite a few streets going in with. The Allen Street was the main street. That was the big street. But Fremont Street was where the OK Corral took place, and so you had other streets, and you had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 avenues going the other direction. There was about 4,000 people that lived in Tombstone when the Earps were there. That's a pretty good sized town.
Wow.
Yeah, particularly for the time.
Mm-hmm.
So
let's continue on with your story, because we've been doing like a segue into history, and we went into from what's Jim's story to now the story of Tombstone. You learned a lot of this stuff along the way because of your fascination with history. You mentioned your tour with Germany and having to kind of leave Hollywood, and we only brushed along it. But when you came back, did you want to go back into the movie business?
I did. I came back, and the studio tours at 20th had shut down. They had come to the conclusion that it was too difficult to have people actually taking tours of the physical studio while they were trying to film. See, Universal built a special place. If you go to Universal Studio Tours, you do not go where they make movies. You go to a Disney type place that's up on the hill, and you're 100 yards away from where the entrance is to making films. I worked on a Quantum Leap episode. And I did a couple TV shows, and we actually went on the working lot of CBS and Universal Studios, and it's completely different. I mean, it's not full of rides, it's not full of big monsters and animals and Godzillas and stuff. And so 20th had come to the conclusion they either had to do what Universal did, which is build an area that's just for studio tours, or they had to just not do studio tours and let the lot be for making movies. And they chose to do that. They chose not to build studios. So when I came back, basically there wasn't any job. The law says you got to give your job back if you've been drafted. The law says if the job exists. And so I went around and I tried to find work. And a lot of the guys I worked with, the stuntmen I worked with, were now working at Universal. At the Universal Studio. And Lance Rimmer, who was kind of the head guy of the stuntmen, he said, come and do a show, come and do an exhibit, come and do a free show, so we'll get the bosses to come out and watch you. And I said, okay. So I went and did that, and I did my show, and I talked to Lance later, and I said, what do you think? And he says, well, what the problem is? The guys that are in charge, they hate guns. They're all anti-war guys. They're anti-Vietnam. They're anti-war. They absolutely hate the military. They hate the guns. The last thing they want to do is have somebody that makes guns attractive in the show. So they aren't going to hire you. They don't want that. So what I did is I went and I got an agent and put together a banquet show, a show for conventions and banquets. And I worked with the Associated Clubs of America, which is he was an absolutely fabulous agent. I mean, he found me as much work as I could handle. There were times where I was doing 30 trips a year. There's only 52 weeks in a year. That means almost every week I'm on a plane, flying somewhere, going somewhere. Now, of course, I was single. I'm 26 years old, but I'm single and I can travel, and there's nothing to keep me from going places. And so I literally went on the road and did conventions and banquets. And that's when I worked with a lot of the people who were the music people as warm up for their music concerts and stuff. And I did that up until, I guess it was 1977. when I was hired by in Colorado Springs, Colorado, the Flying W Ranch, which did Western shows. They had a Sons of the Pioneers kind of music group, and they would come out and they would sing cowboy songs. And then they took a 15-minute break. I would come on stage and talk about Westerns and do gun tricks for 15 minutes. Then they came back and did another 20 minutes of music. And that's the show that I did for 7 years in a row at Colorado Springs. That's where I met Suzanne. That's where I met my wife. In 79, we got married. And I was, 36 years old, and she was 26 years old, which she likes to point out that when I was in college, she was 8 years old. If you're 36, though, it's not such a big deal.
You're right. We'll go with
Right.
that.
Yeah.
All right. So go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and Jim, you've been able to use that knowledge base that you've built over the years to help out at the museum here in Northwest Georgia that Alan was talking about earlier. It's a Smithsonian partner, and it's the Booth Western Museum.
Yeah,
Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do there?
It is absolutely a world-class museum. In fact, we've got 3 outstanding museums in the little town of Cartersville. We have the Tellus, which is a science museum, which has a planetarium, which has the full-size recreations of dinosaurs. They've got stuff about space travel. I mean, it as a science museum, it's absolutely one of the top in the country. And then we have the Booth Western Art Museum, which is world class. And then we are going to open up in a few days the Savoy, which is a automobile museum, which is also going to be a big full museum. Both the Tellus and the Booth are 120,000 square feet, so they're good sized big museums. Again, it's interesting because people will always ask, they'll say, why would you build in what is obviously the southeastern part of the United States a museum devoted to Western art? And the answer has less to do with where we are and everything to do with how old you are. And the people who collected the art are my age. See, when I was born, I'm so old that when I was born, the Dead Sea was only sick.
You've been waiting all night to use that.
I know. And the people who collected the art for the museum are in their 80s. So they grew up with this Western dominating. And as their businesses made money and as they could afford it, they filled their business offices and their homes with art that they loved, which was about the frontier and the movement west. And so it's an interesting thing. And there's a number of things that happened in the world of art. First of all, right around the same time that these Westerns became so popular in the TV shows, the magazine world changed. The magazine world went from painters, artists, to photography. Okay, everybody's heard of Norman Rockwell, right? I mean, Norman Rockwell did zillion number of covers for Saturday Evening Post. Well, once we get into the 1960s, how many Norman Rockwell covers are there? Zero, because they went from hiring an artist to do a picture to having a photograph and photographers doing the pictures. And that was all through the magazine world. And so guess what happened? All those artists that had been doing those pictures, they were hurting because that's where the money came from, was doing paintings for magazines, for illustrations, for stories in magazines. And so they looked around and they said, what can we do that would sell? And guess what? People were buying paintings of cowboys on horses, of cattle drives, of Indians in front of teepees, Indians chasing buffalo. And in 1965, 4 of those guys, Joe Beeler, Johnny Hampton, John Phillips, the one guy was he was an illustrator, George Pippin, and they got together and they formed the Cowboy Artists of America. And they started painting cowboys and Western and horses and all stuff and started selling it through art galleries, and it took off like crazy. And what's interesting about the booth started late. Now, there were a couple of very wealthy people in the 1930s and 1940s, especially in Oklahoma and Texas who made their fortunes from oil. When they started finding oil wells in Texas and Oklahoma, people like John Gilcrease and Thomas Gilcrease and Eamon Carter became multimillionaires.
Mm-hmm.
And so they began buying Charlie Russell's, Frederick Remington's, Taos Santa Fe School Art. And by the time that the Booth Museum was even started, when the thoughts were started, those paintings were gone. You couldn't buy a Charlie Russell painting no matter how much money you had because it was gone. It was somebody else had it. And so they made a decision. What's interesting, they made a decision, since we can't get Charlie Russell paintings. By the way, the museum has two Charlie Russells, 2 Frederick Remingtons. 2. If you go to the Eamon Carter Museum, they got 45, 50 of them. You go to the Gilcrease in Tulsa, Oklahoma, they got 40 or 50 Russells and Remingtons. But anyway, so what they did is they made the decision to buy the best of the living working artists that were dealing with the subject in the American West. The result is now, in 2021, 22, we have the finest collection in the world of living Western artist art. And what's great about that is those people, since they're alive, can come visit. And they can do lectures and talks and programs, and we do special exhibitions. Right now we have an exhibition of Tucker Smith landscapes that is magnificent. The guy is fabulous. What a great landscape painter he is. And when we opened the show, he came and gave a talk, gave a lecture, gave a talk about the influences in his art. And that makes the booth really special. Really does. What's
really neat is the booth in and of itself was sort of like the first experiment to see will this work? And and with the explosion of it, they had to do a renovation to almost double the size.
Yeah, they had to add 40,000 square feet. Yeah. Which I think the only sad thing, the sad thing is that most people today, they only get their information from television or social media. I mean, that's basically where you that's where they get the information. And it's word of mouth in the long run is very effective in many areas. Word of mouth works really, really well. But you don't reach the general public quickly with word of mouth. And it's sad because I go to the grocery store, I go to Publix, and as I'm checking out, I'll ask the person, I'll say, have you been to the Booth Museum? Mm-hmm. And they'll say, oh, no, I heard about it. I heard there's a museum. But you know that if they came, they would love it. If most of the people that are especially over 30, over 40, in that older group, if they came to the booth, there would be so many things they would love. The presidential gallery by itself is just amazing. We have a hand-signed letter from everybody who's ever been president of the United States. How many places can that?
Wow.
Right. And the letter we have that Abraham Lincoln wrote is absolutely fabulous. It's about one of the biggest Indian wars that ever took place in America, where hundreds of people were killed and 38 people were executed, were hanged by the neck until dead. This letter deals with that story of that war, and you can come in there, and it's of course written on letterhead stationery, President of the United States, signed by Abraham Lincoln. And as you walk around, Teddy Roosevelt and Ronald Reagan and George Washington, and every single president. Millard Fillmore is my favorite president. Okay. Now, I've never met anybody who said Millard Fillmore was their favorite president, but it's my favorite letter.
I say this is a first.
Yeah, Millard Fillmore is my favorite letter. Millard Fillmore, who was president of the United States, wrote a letter which is in the Booth Museum presidential letter area. And here's what his letter says, and I quote, "I am surprised at the velocity with which it appears that my stock has descended in the market." He's writing to his financial advisors. Uh-huh. He says, "But it cannot be helped, and I'm going to take your advice to keep the remaining shares. Where does my account stand now? Had I not better sell some of my bonds and purchase some more safe securities? I fear a blow up in the money market." That was written. Wow. That was written 100 years ago. I mean, isn't that amazing? Yeah.
What I love, when you go through that gallery, is once again the use of language, the use of words.
Yeah.
Just
it is
just beautiful, and the handwriting. especially the penmanship of the early presidents.
It is amazing. Yeah, it's amazing. So yeah, it's really one of the most fun. And then of course we have a really good Civil War gallery, which tells the story, the Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
Then we have a great children's area. If you got kids, you go through Sagebrush Ranch and you can climb on a big fiberglass horse. You can get in a stagecoach that rocks back and forth. You can prepare Dutch oven biscuits at the back of a chuck wagon. You can play these games. They have video monitors. If you're a kid, it's absolutely a ball. You can dress up in cowboy clothes. It's the Sagebrush Ranch is a great children's area.
One of the things I wanted to get to before we run out of time with you, and again, it goes back to your knowledge and the knowledge we have of Tombstone, thanks to the records. If people are looking to do a maybe fall trip to Northwest Georgia, they should pay attention to the calendar for the Cowboy Festival, because you do a recreation with actual period actors of the gunfight.
Right, the fourth Saturday of October. Sometimes there's 5 weekends in October, sometimes there's 4, but the fourth weekend of October, that Saturday is our annual Festival of the American West and Symposium. It's a symposium because we bring in people to give lectures and speeches and talks, and we bring in historians, we bring in artists, and then it's a festival because we bring in Indian dance group that performs great Indian dancing. We have vendors with food, we have chuck wagons that cook Dutch oven cooking, and then we have music, and then I MC a reenactment of the gunfight at OK Corral, and we'll do that like 4 times in the day. Yeah,
awesome stuff.
It's a 30-second gunfight, and I figured out how to make it last half an hour.
Like any good storyteller, Jim. Yeah. We'll never have enough time to cover everything, but where you are right now, enjoying your time with the booth, where do you see your storytelling and performing going over let's say the next, I always try to end with the next 5 years. Where do you see what you're doing?
Well, the real question is, how long can I continue to work as much as I am? I have cut back to 3 days. I'm working 3 days a week, but I'm 78 years old. And as long as I can still be comfortable talking and standing up and doing that, I think I can still give lectures and talks and do programs. But I think I've already slowed down a lot from how much I used to do and how much gun stuff I could do. I used to be able to do a lot of tricks with a gun that I can't do anymore. Now I have to talk about the guns rather than demonstrate. I can still draw a gun, but I can't draw it as fast as I used to be.
If people are listening right now and they've just been fascinated by your voice, your storytelling, your knowledge, your history, one of the nice things is, for now anyway, and it's been a program facet every Tuesday at about 8:40 a.m. Eastern time. You get to join me on the radio and we talk about this week in Western history.
Yeah,
and we go by the
last time we got together, it was Mark Twain's birthday. That was kind of fun,
Yeah,
so, yeah.
What I would encourage people to do is set your alarm, and you can listen to WBHF radio and listen in, because by the end of the year, if you tune in at that 10 to 15 minutes every single week at that time, by the end of the year, you kind of have had your chicken soup for the cowboy soul. Something for every day.
We should have a quiz. Everybody should have to fill out a quiz.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well,
and Walt, I know you don't even live in the town, and you love to listen online on those days.
Yeah, I try to listen, and I listen on TuneIn app, and so I always try to tune in and listen to y'all. And there have actually been a couple of times when I've been driving to work, and I'm like, they're not done yet. So kind of
stay in the car,
roll through a parking lot, and find an excuse to listen to the end. And I always find it fascinating when you come up with some tidbit like, this isn't really how this happened, or here's what the legend says, but this is what really, and then also just, here's what happened today in history or this week in history. And it really brings it to life.
It does.
And
we give ourselves a lot of time. We basically look at the week that it's go back as far as 1700s, because sometimes we'll talk about stuff about the exploration of America by the Spanish coming up and establishing, say, Santa Fe, New Mexico as a northern town of Spain. So we'll go all the way back to there. and then we'll go up to right around usually turn of the century. With very few exceptions, do we go in past the 1900s. But that gives us a lot of years to look at for that particular week on the calendar, and so it's almost impossible to have not have at least half a dozen to a dozen things that we talk about because we spread ourselves over so many years. So we always have something.
What I love is it can be anywhere from the early explorers and mountain men and fur trappers to the settlers heading out, and Horace Greeley putting that famous line, "Go west, young man," and then the railroads and the tie-in of the cattle drives and the Pony Express and the stagecoach robberies, and then the famous bad guys, the Dolans and everybody that we talk about. I love it. I sit there and I've done this so many years with you, and I'm still sitting there like I'm hearing it for the first time.
Last week when we met, we talked about Horace Greeley because it was his death. Horace Greeley had died, and we said he died 24 days after he lost the presidential election to Ulysses S. Grant. I mean, how many people knew that Horace Greeley ran against Grant for president of the United States? And what if he had won? He would have died 24 days into office.
Right. Yeah. I think that stuff is fascinating. Jim, you have so many stories still to tell. We could probably just pick a movie and just go at it. We could come at it from Hollywood. We're going to have you back again sometime. Thank you so very much for spending so much time with us and telling us a little bit about it.
I'm glad to do it. I always love our Tuesdays. And we always tell people, if you want to talk or learn more about it or share, I'm always available at the Booth Museum. I'm there Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays from opening until 5 o'clock. And so if you come in, ask them at the desk and say, call Jim and see if he wants to come up for a cup of coffee and talk about Gunsmoke. I mean, I'd be glad to do it.
Folks, if you do that, I'm telling you right now, 3 hours will disappear like that.
Yeah.
You'll be transported.
Absolutely.
Jim, thanks so much for being with us here on the Wilder Ride inside our listeners' lounge.
All right, Alan, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, thanks, Jim.
You bet. And I appreciate it, Walt. Enjoyed it a lot.
All right. Well, that was awesome. Had Jim with us for the hour. I know he had to go. He's part of the Western Historical Society. Great organization. And just it's so cool to see. Here's this guy who has just as much fun telling the stories today as when he first stumbled across the, Davy Crocket and the stuff on television, and just it forever kind of guided his life.
Yeah.
Pretty crazy.
Yeah. Well, and I always, and maybe in my mind, Westerns are more popular than they really are, but I always enjoy a good Western. And, sometimes you have to acknowledge, like Back to the Future 3, that it isn't real accurate, but they are entertaining. And so I really enjoyed that discussion.
Let's put it this way. One of my items that if I could ever be in a movie, if they said you can only be in one, but you got to pick it, I would love to be in a Western.
Oh, no doubt. No doubt. I mean, the old costumes, the 6-shooters, that'd be
riding
a blast.
The horse and just the shootout and just the I don't care if it's a stereotypical Western, just I would love it. That would be so much fun.
Well, and we talked some in the interview with Jim just about the language that people used and the cool words and phrases and all that. Just that would all be really neat.
I think, and it's wild because my wife and I, we have very different views of what we like to rewatch as movies. I'm not a big comedy fan. There are very few like comedies I really like, and she loves them. I'm not a huge rom-com person, but I can watch them. But I love Tombstone, and she loves it, and so we can always agree on that. So that always makes for a good night of watching TV or watching the movie. Yeah, that's awesome. So do y'all have a particular movie that you go back to time and time again? We have a handful, actually. And ironically, we don't have a movie to review, so this is good. We can chat a little bit about this. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Raiders of the Lost Ark, we go to all the time. The first one. And it is not called Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. Right. No. Raiders of the Lost Ark. The original Star Wars trilogy. We don't watch the prequels. No. At all. We've watched all of the sequel since then, but we don't go back to them. We have only gone back to the original and Rogue One. Rogue One is the only prequel in our minds that we can agree on. We're like, let's watch Rogue One. And then we almost always will watch Star Wars right after Rogue One. Yeah.
Well, Rogue One is such a perfect lead to Star Wars. I mean, they really, really did it right.
Right. That, without a doubt, in the Disney era, the best Disney era Star Wars movie. Blows away Solo, blows away all three of the sequels, the 7, 8, and 9. It's just such a tight story, so well done, and gets me every time. I watch it every time. Just I'm gripped, and it's almost like I want different endings, but I know what's going to happen.
Yeah, right. Yeah. No, I know how that goes. Well, how about Westerns? Do you have particular Westerns that y'all go to?
Well, besides Tombstone, that really is it. I love I think we both enjoy Silverado.
Oh yeah,
but it's Tombstone. It's like the one Western, because I love all the Clint Eastwood. She's like, oh, no. And we do like the Back to the Future trilogy, and so part 3 is set in the West. Mm-hmm. We'll do a marathon of that. We consider that as one now long movie told in 3 parts.
That's great.
The only other thing that we go through all the time, the 2 kind of fantasy, and one's more high fantasy and one's more like kid, but the books grow up. We'll do a Harry Potter marathon every now and then. We'll just start with movie 1 and maybe one a night, or sometimes over the holidays. If we get snowed in, we have the occasional ice storm. We may watch half the volumes in one day and then watch the other half the next day. Just spend 2 days doing nothing but eating crappy food, drinking lots of beer, and just enjoying a couple of days off. And then we'll do that with The Lord of the Rings. We'll watch the director's extended cuts of Fellowship of the Ring, The Two Towers, and then Return of the King. And we get lost in that at least once a year. And the only other movie we go to a lot, especially this time of year, it is a great rom-com set in Christmas time, but Love Actually is probably one of my all-time favorite comedies / romantic comedies, but it's just such a good story, and just love Actually.
Yeah. Well, from a seasonal standpoint, I've always got to watch Planes, Trains, and Automobiles this time of year. So I'll sometime the next week I'll cue that up. And man, the only hard part about watching that is John Candy not being with us anymore. The man was an amazing comic genius. Just I put him up there with Gene Wilder as one of my favorite, and Steve Martin, frankly, as my favorite comic actors. And I think that the reason is their timing. Mm-hmm. And we always talked about Gene Wilder's comic pauses,
right?
that were so good and perfectly well timed. And Candy has that same style in front of the camera, the same ability to just grab your attention. Steve Martin, of course, is the same way. So anyway, those 2 guys together didn't overshadow each other, never stepped on each other, but just complemented each other so well in that movie. So anyway, that's my movie review, I guess, for the day.
Let me ask this: when we're talking movies, does John Hughes make a bad movie though?
No. I mean, he doesn't.
Even if he wrote it and didn't direct it, he still ends up having a charming movie.
Yeah, they're always solid.
Coming up in the what we've watched, we did go to one of our Christmas movies. I hadn't seen it in forever. My wife, Susan, hadn't seen the remake of it. So we'll talk about one of those movies that was written by John Hughes, produced by him, but directed by somebody else.
Oh, okay, good.
So I've got that in my what am I watching? So what have we watched this week? The only thing movie-wise that I really, and she and I both agree on, is Ghostbusters, the first Ghostbusters movie.
Yeah.
You can almost always go back to that. She likes it. I could watch Die Hard probably once a week. That's not her favorite, but she can watch it. But
I love Die Hard.
She's got to be in the mood for Die Hard. But I'm like, what do you need? I mean, it's Die Hard. I mean, that puts you in the mood, right?
Right. Yeah, you don't have to be in a mood to watch Die Hard. You just watch Die Hard.
So, but yeah, we have our handful of go-tos. The problem is sometimes, even then, she's like, well, we just watched Raiders. I don't want to watch it again. Well, okay, what do you want to watch? And then we end up going for like an hour arguing over what to watch. Okay, fine. Let's just watch Raiders.
Yeah. I mean, I know that some couples argue about where to eat. Y'all just argue about what to watch.
Yeah, we do. We do.
So,
we don't have to worry about where to eat or what to eat, since I do all the cooking. So
yeah, there you go.
Makes it easy. All right. So no movie review, but that's kind of our movie segment, right? We're just wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Yeah, there you go. We're good.
Okay. So let's get into our news, a segment we like to call
It's no bullshit.
Walt, what do you got?
Well, last week we had that crazy article about the explosive that was found on the New Jersey beach that was circa World War II.
Right.
Well, I'm going through the news this week, and guess what I found?
Another bomb.
From Reuters. 4 injured after old World War II aircraft bomb explodes in Munich.
Holy cow.
Oh my God, really?
Yeah, so Berlin, this week, December 1st, 4 people were injured when an old aircraft bomb exploded at a bridge near Munich's busy main train station on Wednesday, police said on Twitter, raising the number of wounded from 3 earlier. The Munich Fire Brigade said one of the people was seriously injured, unfortunately. More than 2,000 tons of live bombs and munitions are discovered each year in Germany, more than 70 years after the end of World War II.
Wow.
British and American warplanes pummeled the country with 1.5 million tons of bombs that killed 600,000 people. Officials estimate that 15% of the bombs failed to explode, some of which were buried 6 meters, which is 20 feet deep in the ground. The explosion happened as the site was being drilled to build a tunnel, police said, adding the area had been cordoned off. There's no danger outside of this area. Explosives experts were summoned to the site to examine the remains of the bomb, the fire brigade said. Due to the blast, rail travel to and from the main train station was suspended.
Yeah, okay. It makes sense.
World War II bombs. Yeah, right. Yeah, that was pretty much the most obvious thing they could have said. World War II bombs are regularly discovered during construction work in Germany and are usually diffused by experts or destroyed in controlled explosions. However, there have been cases of deadly blasts in the past. In 2012, a fireball lit up the sky in Munich, causing millions of euros of damage to 17 buildings when authorities had to detonate a deteriorating 500-pound bomb. In 2015, a 1,000-pound bomb ripped a 3-meter-deep hole in a motorway off Offenbach in central Germany.
It's no bullshit.
So stay tuned. I guess we have more of these to come, but watch it when you're around any kind of construction in Germany.
Yeah. And I'm going to, the whole idea of backpacking across Europe, I may tiptoe across Germany.
Yeah, or just avoid it altogether. Well, and I heard one time that there was a place where there was a World War I battle, and it's either every time it starts to freeze for the first time or when it thaws in the spring, landmines and bombs will go off because of the shifting earth that sets them off. It's just insane.
That's so crazy. Wow. What a cool story. I'm glad that nobody was killed, but sad someone that.
Yeah. Sorry for the injuries, but
yeah,
it could have been a lot worse, I guess.
All right. Well, I've got a fun story. This is right up the alley of You Better Call Saul, for those folks who are aware of that character from the spinoff from Breaking Bad. If you tried to think about people who live up to their word, lawyers probably would not be on the top of your list. But sometimes you find a lawyer who really is perfectly honest. Let's meet Daniel Muizig from Pennsylvania. He's one of those lawyers, but for all the wrong reasons. In 2014, he released a viral ad in which he boasted that he thinks like a criminal. A smooth criminal. That makes him a good defense attorney. I think like a criminal. Keep that in mind. That was 2014. As it turns out, Muizig meant exactly what he said. The criminal defense attorney is now going to jail for drug trafficking.
Oh, uh-oh.
Yes, mid-November, Muizig pleaded guilty to conspiracy to distribute hundreds of pounds of marijuana. That was from the Washington Post. Story goes, between April and May of 2019, he ran a drug stash from his apartment, which also served as the drug network's headquarters.
Nice.
None of this should be as a surprise to anyone, though. Muizig made his views on the law clear in an ad where he said, quote, "America was built on freedom, not a bunch of people with more money than you telling you what you can and can't do with all their stupid laws."
Okay.
The video features the obligatory bald eagle flying by when Muizig mentions freedom, and he puts quote marks around laws like, those things we may or may not choose to follow.
Oh, boy.
Yes. So the law enforcement officers who had been following him decided to pay a little more attention in late May of 2019. That's when they noticed two folks that had been targeted that were going into Muizig's apartment. On the day, the cops observed Muizig enter his own apartment first with a backpack. A moment later, two others arrived in a Jeep carrying a shopping bag and a vacuum sealer into the building.
Oh.
And two more men arrived in a separate car, and then sometime later, a third car, a Dodge Ram. The gathered men unloaded several boxes from the van before loading it with two others. I'll try to summarize this. The Ram drove off, and that's when cops pulled it over. In the two boxes were $400,000 in cash.
Oh.
Yeah, so it led the police next to raid the drug house. Inside, they discovered multiple boxes of weed, material for packing the drugs, and the vacuum sealing machine, as well as a money counter. According to officers, all the marijuana in the apartment weighed a total of 440 pounds.
Yikes.
Muizig was personally responsible for distributing anywhere from 220 to 882 pounds of weed over his criminal career. On top of the drugs, the police seized two pistols, a revolver, a shotgun, and more than 200 rounds of ammo. They also confiscated a car, jewelry, and more drug paraphernalia. The judge presiding over the case that they just went to mid-November says sentencing will happen in March. The ex-lawyer will face a mandatory 5 years in prison. Well, he'd better get a good lawyer, preferably one that doesn't advertise himself with the tagline, "Laws are arbitrary."
It's no bullshit.
Oh my gosh.
I wish I had
Nice.
made this up, but this is from the news.
Wow.
Hey, hire me as your lawyer. I think like a criminal. Apparently, he wasn't lying.
Yeah, hire me as your lawyer. I don't like laws.
I find them to be quote unquote arbitrary. Wink, wink.
Wow. Okay. What a guy. Well, speaking of morons and criminality,
They
this
do
one
go hand
comes
in
from
hand a lot.
Yeah, they're pretty entertaining. So from NBC5 in Chicago, Calumet City police carjacked while searching for carjacking suspects. This one's short and sweet, folks. A Calumet City police SUV was stolen as officers searched for carjacking suspects near a gas station Tuesday morning. Officers were called to the gas station on Sibley Boulevard around 6:20 a.m. to investigate an attempted carjacking, a Calumet City spokesman said. When they arrived, 4 armed suspects ran off in different directions. While officers searched the area, one of the suspects made his way back to the gas station and drove off in a marked police SUV, the spokesman said.
It's
The
like something you'd expect out of the Naked Gun.
Yes, this is right out of the Naked Gun. The suspect got onto the Bishop Ford Freeway and exited near 99th and Green Streets, where he dumped the SUV and ran off, the spokesman said. Officers used the vehicle's GPS tracker to recover the SUV, which was not damaged. No arrests have been reported in this case.
It's no bullshit.
That's so damn funny. That's like
That
a
is
Keystone
amazing.
Cop thing. Oh my God.
Absolutely amazing.
That may be one of the best news, funniest, and certainly best news items of the entire season. I love it.
Oh, that's great. Great story.
Well, you know, we always look for odd and weird stories. Here's one that I wish would happen to us, meaning you and me, or me and my wife, or maybe you and your significant other and me and my wife. But this would be really cool. This just happened this past week. Blizzard traps a group of people in a UK pub for 3 nights.
Oh, that's such a shame.
Yes, think about this. The Tan Hill Inn, built in the 17th century, so you already have a great historic building, is considered the highest pub in the UK, located 1,732 feet above sea level. Well, on Friday, November the 26th, a crowd of about 61 people had gathered at the pub to listen to an Oasis tribute band. And that's when the storm hit. They're calling it Storm Arwen. One of the worst blizzards to hit the British Isles in years brought gale force winds with 3-foot tall piles of snow. What was supposed to be a Friday night trip to the pub turned into a 3-night ordeal. With the roads and the pub's doors blocked by snow, the guests had nowhere to go. But on November the 29th, snowplows finally broke through and freed the trapped pub goers. So how distressing was the experience? Not so bad. It turns out that a pub with a well-stocked bar and kitchen may be one of the better places to find yourself snowed in.
I would think.
One of the people said, quote, "It sounds a bit like a cliche, but they came as strangers and now we're leaving as friends." Aww. It's no wonder, though. With nothing else to do, the visitors continued doing what you usually do in the pub. The Tan Hill Inn, which had a well-stocked pantry, decided to provide food at heavily discounted prices or sometimes completely free. And when we say well-stocked, we mean it. On Sunday, for example, the Trapped crowd got to enjoy a traditional British Sunday lunch with roast beef and Yorkshire pudding. Even their dogs got their share of the beef once the inn exhausted its dog food supply. The only thing we ran out of was breakfast sausages, said the Tan Hill duty manager, Donna Harrowell.
Oh boy.
As a result, on Monday, the guests had to settle for bacon sandwiches for breakfast.
Oh, that's terrible.
Oh, I don't know. How could we survive, Walt? The crowd, of course, didn't go thirsty. The inn staff kept the bar open all the 3 days. Drinks flowed freely. Of course, the guests still had to pay the price, but what else are you going to do? The story wraps up. Of course, you can't just spend 3 days eating and drinking. Well, yeah, you could. You and I would find a way to do that. But they were able to have some fun. The band that was there would play sets. Then they would open up the karaoke machines. People, after getting tanked, were up there just having fun. And then the story ends with, as they realized that this was, that the shopkeepers were keeping them stocked with food and drink, they all took turns waiting tables or clearing tables, washing dishes, and helping basically keep the place cleaned up while they waited for the plows to come.
It's amazing. It's astounding. But it's no bullshit.
How cool would that be to get snowed in and stuck in a bar and grill?
Absolutely amazing.
So the headline caught me, and I was like, too cool to pass up. Blizzard trapping a group in a UK pub, and from the 17th century. I mean, think about that. That's Shakespeare's day.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I would say so. Built somewhere in the 1600s. Yeah, I there are worse places you could find me trapped.
Yeah, that would be pretty amazing.
All right, we are moving to our last and final segment, and we are doing our entertainment segment. This is where Walt, you and I, we talked a little bit about movies, so we get to talk about what we're watching, reading, and what we're listening to. So why don't we go ahead and visit the watching category? I'll let you go first.
Well, it's been a really busy week with the holiday and, of course, UGA playing Georgia Tech and football, so I've not been watching a whole lot. But Lost in Space dropped this week, and it's season 3.
Wow,
yeah.
Okay.
And started watching. I've knocked out the first episode and a half, and it is really good.
Okay, I got to ask this because I have not watched a single season, not a single moment of Lost in Space on Netflix. Is it good?
Oh, you need to stop watching whatever you're watching right now and watch Lost in Space.
That good, huh?
It is fantastic. I mean, kind of put aside the original series. It's not campy. It's not anything.
No, I prefer that because I loved the reboot of Battlestar Galactica because they took it seriously.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is really, really good. And so I highly recommend it. I really am enjoying the show. And season 1 from start to finish was amazing. So I thought they're really going to have to step it up for season 2 and keep this pace and energy. And they did all the way through. And season 2 left with a great cliffhanger. And season 3 has just picked up. And so far, it's even better than season 2.
Wow. All right. Well, I know my wife really liked it. And I don't think I've heard anybody not like it. But now that I've got an endorsement from you, I may have to carve out some binge time.
Yeah, I would definitely do that.
Cool.
So that's really the biggest thing I'm watching right now. I mean, I've got other things I'm, still looking at, Seinfeld and some other stuff. But yeah, Lost in Space is my big one this week.
Well, for us, we had a lot that we were catching up on with the wife having returned from her trip. We caught up on episode 4 of Wheel of Time. I'm not quite sure I'm going to stick with it much longer if it doesn't pick up more. I wanted to give it some effort. It's a fantasy. It's on Amazon. Yeah. So I had my daughter come over while my wife was gone. We were going to watch Dune on HBO Max, and I didn't realize it was going to disappear after 30 days, and we missed it by 3 days. So the only way to see it right now is to go back to the theater until it comes out either on Blu-ray in January and or for paid streaming later. So we ended up watching WandaVision. My daughter had never watched WandaVision. We binged the first half all in one go, just 5 straight episodes. And my daughter was like, this is great. And it was. It's such an awesome MCU series on the Disney Plus. So I know I mentioned it the first time we watched it, but I'm saying it again. It's well worth watching if you didn't get your chance to see it yet.
I would say that is one of the best series that I've seen so far on Disney Plus. There are a couple others that are great and worth watching, but that I think was the best one so far.
I think so. I think Loki probably came in second. The unfortunately Winter Soldier, the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, kind of a distant third. It was okay, but it wasn't great. What I will tell you is great so far. The first 2 episodes of Hawkeye dropped. Oh my God. That was fun. And I knew going in, they were only going to do 6 episodes. I didn't know they were going to drop the first 2. When they dropped the first 2, in the first episode, Hawkeye talks about the fact that it's 6 days till Christmas and some events take place that lead them overnight to the next day. And then the next episode, they talk about how it's 5 days till Christmas. So there's 4 episodes left. His whole thing is to try to solve the problem and get home in time for Christmas. Not since Die Hard have I thought, here is an action/comedy fun flick set at Christmas, in Christmas, where I want my hero to try to figure a way out of the mess he's in. It's fantastic, the first 2 episodes.
Very cool.
Yeah, give it a go. I told you about John Hughes. Well, one of the movies my wife and I decided to break out first for our Christmas movie watching. We watched the 1994 remake of Miracle on 34th Street. And I mentioned 1994 because I didn't think it was that old, the remake, and it was. I'm like,
that's
oh my God.
Really hard to believe, isn't it?
It's coming up in a few more years. That'll be 30 years since that version came out. I was like, oh my God, but it was great. It was so much fun to watch. So if you like a good updated Christmassy movie, check that out. I did hit the movie theater. Went with BK and his wife. My wife and I went to go see Ghostbusters Afterlife. That was fun.
Yeah. So what are you saying and recommending about that movie now?
I think you should see it. I think it's not as funny it may not be as timeless as the first Ghostbusters because they do a lot of similar story threads. It has a similar sort of skeletal structure in terms of what happens first, second, third, but it is far better than Ghostbusters 2.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. I thought I was worried about the kids being too hokey or silly. McKenna Grace, who plays Egon's granddaughter, just the perfect amount of just the quirky nerdiness and a little bit of that awkwardness without being like the brilliant scientist who can build things immediately. I mean, it's very believable. She runs into a little kid who owns his own podcast and he calls himself Podcast. It is so funny. The mom is great because she's a disgruntled, just middle-aged mom who's just trying to deal with bankruptcy and inheriting this piece of property in the middle of nowhere. Paul Rudd is fantastic as a summer school teacher who's just trying to get by. It's really good. It's a fun adventure. It's not as good as the first movie, but it's definitely better than the second.
Wow, cool.
So I think it's well worth watching.
Okay.
I always mention Ashley Burton, her movie reaction channel on YouTube. That's always good. Popcorn in Bed is good. But I got trapped in the wormhole of YouTube binge watching when I stumbled across a channel called the Try Channel. That's what they call it. But really what it is Irish people try blank. And
oh, yes, I've seen these.
Be.
Yep, I've seen these.
Oh, my God. They're only about 8 to 10 minutes each episode, but it could be anything from trying IHOP restaurant items for the first time visiting America to candy, to beer, to wine, to whiskey, to scotch, to you name it. They've tried it. I mean, and they're so funny, and they're just, I'm addicted. They pop up now because I've seen so many in the algorithm, the Try Channel. So it's a bunch of Irish people trying different things.
So I think the first one I saw was Irish people trying Chick-fil-A sandwiches. And some of them were totally blown away, and some of them were completely underwhelmed.
Yeah.
So definitely entertaining.
It's very entertaining, and it's so silly. I'm just watching people try things, but I want to see what they have to say. Some of the drinking ones are the funniest because they're trying like,
oh, they're great
college drinks or the most powerful American drinks or American bourbon versus Irish whiskey. Just some really fun nuggets. If you're sitting and you got 10 minutes to kill, you can just grab anyone at random and just watch.
Yeah, they're really fun. They're really a lot of fun.
All right, that's all I've got for watching, which was a lot. So let's move on to reading, which won't be a lot. Walt?
No, I'm still kind of working my way through this Bill O'Reilly book, Killing the Mob. Hopefully I will finish that sometime here in the next few days, but it's really good, great book. And when I tell people I'm reading that, I hear from everybody else, oh, now you got to read this one. Now you got to read that one. And so many people I'm talking to have read that entire series. Mm-hmm. So it's very readable, great research done on it. So worth your time and attention.
The book I'm still working through, and it's just because with Thanksgiving and working on the sitting room, I didn't have any time to myself to read. I apparently found plenty of time to watch shit, but I didn't read anything. But I'm going to still finish my way through Dune. I'm almost done, but I don't read I can't power read for 7 hours anymore like I could when I was a teenager in my early 20s. My wife can sit there for 12 straight hours and read a book. I can't. I'll either drift off or my mind goes somewhere else. I can do it. I have to do it in discrete chunks now, and I kind of hate that. But
yeah.
It's just because I got so much else on my plate, and I just have to keep moving.
I know. I'm the same way. I'm too busy. I've really got to figure out this next year how to slow down a little bit.
Yes, that's going to be as we wrap up. I'm going to talk about maybe New Year's resolutions in our final episode coming up in a few weeks.
Yep.
I've got to figure out how to put less irons in the fire, but more quality irons.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. So as we wrap up, let's get to what are we listening to, Walt?
There are 3 that I'm one new one and 2 that I've recommended before that I want to mention. A few months ago, I kind of got into the cult of Peloton, and I swore I wasn't going to get this much into the cult, but there is a podcast that I found by a couple of just Peloton users called The Clip Out. And it's kind of a health and, nutrition. And if you're a Peloton user, it talks about the different classes and different programs that they have. And it's by 2 just regular folks who do a fantastic job with it. I think one of them's in entertainment, but I'm not sure what they do. But it's really, really good. And again, there's a lot of really good nutrition tips and other kind of things. So check that out if you are into Peloton or health or fitness or whatever. The second one, Holy Crap, It's Sports. Pete Davis, who was a guest a few weeks ago, just a great show. And if you're into sports, you need to be listening to this because he covers everything on the national level and a lot of local Atlanta stuff. But with Georgia being at the top of the heap right now in the national championship hunt, he's got a lot to say about that. Other stuff going on in the NFL, the NBA. So there's a lot of great stuff on his show. Check that out every week. And then I'm still kind of fascinated by this train wreck of the Murdaugh murders over in South Carolina. and they keep putting out more and more episodes. I think they keep thinking, okay, we got 1 or 2 episodes left, and then more crazy crap breaks. So check that out. And it's spelled Murdaugh, the Murdaugh Murders. And I mean, it's really just a crazy, and if you're not familiar with it, it's an attorney in South Carolina who is a prosecutor and like a 3rd generation prosecutor in the county. And all of a sudden, all these deaths start occurring around him. Somebody slipped and fell in his house, and then his wife and kids got murdered, and one of his sons. I mean, one of his sons accidentally got drunk and killed somebody in his boat. Just had a DUI on his boat. I mean, it is insane. And then the attorney paid somebody to try to kill him, and they just grazed his skull and left him on the side of the road. So it's freaking off the chain. So it's worth following, and this podcast really does it justice.
Excellent. Once again, I think I packed my entire week with watching more things than listening. I have been doing a lot of Christmas music listening. This is that time of year where I can just say, and I love having the echo. I know a lot of people worry about smart speakers.
Oh, yeah, it's great.
But I've said, if someone at the Amazon, mothership is getting their jollies off, hearing me talk about making food, singing weird lyrics to my dogs, and or yelling at them when they bark at the Amazon guy dropping a package off, then hey, more power to them. I know they're not listening. If they want to, whatever. I love being able to just say, play this or play this album or play this style of music. And it's been so cool to just have nonstop Christmas music going on when I'm working around the house. I want to remind everybody about a new Movies by Minute show that dropped, the Time Bandits Minute. They are coming up on minute number 7 now, but they did the first 3 themselves to introduce, and I was the very first guest in minutes 4, 5, and 6. All 3 of those are out now, so you can hear me give my thoughts on Terry Gilliam's awesome, fantastic movie, Time Bandits.
Yeah, I have several minutes later on in that show, so I'll have to remind everybody when those drop. Great movie, and those 2 guys are really just awesome guys to listen to and support, and so I really enjoyed my time on that show as well.
All right, that's all I've got. I do listen to Radio Labyrinth, but I'm behind, so I only mention what I've listened to in the last week, so I still got to get caught back up with them.
Yeah, they're great. I was just listening to their Thanksgiving special yesterday. And so great folks. Definitely one to support.
All right. Anything else you want to mention before we wrap this one up with a bow? Funny,
I think I'm good.
I'm heading to holidays.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to next week. And, our next guest, that will be very entertaining. So,
our penultimate guest, the second from the last guest we're going to have for the season.
Yeah, that's crazy.
I guess I can tease it.
Yeah.
Should I do that, or should I tease it now, or should I let you do the housekeeping first?
No, let's go ahead and tease it.
So we've had other voices from the Von Hessler Doctrine. It's a show that's on from 9 to noon Eastern on WSB, a huge radio station in the Atlanta market. We've mentioned them multiple times. We've had the voices, we've had the characters, we've had the guests, we've had the people that surround it, but we have not had the Grand Poobah himself. He is going to do a rare show for us. We are going to have the one, the only, Eric Von Hessler joining us, the leader of the Von Hessler Doctrine. He will be with us in the lounge next week.
Yeah, and I've been listening to Eric for a long, long time. He was one of the 2 guys that a lot of folks around the Atlanta market know as the regular guys.
Well, the LA market would know that too, because they came from LA.
That's right. That's right.
Name.
So, and they've probably been fired more times from the same station than anybody in history. And so it'll be great to kind of hear his story and talk to him. I've never actually met Eric, so I'm really looking forward to that.
Going to be a lot of fun. All right. So before we let everybody go, we've teased what's coming up next week. Let's talk about folks who may have listened for the very first time. All of Jim Dunham's friends from the Wild West Association. They've gotten to this point and they go, we loved Jim. Why did he do this? He left these 2 guys in charge, and no, we don't like these guys. But if they do like us, where can they go?
Well, the best place is to check out our website at thewilderride.com. You got everything there from our bios to just about everything else about us that you would be mildly interested in. A list of all our past guests and a place where you can listen to any of our episodes. You'll also find there our season 1 and 2 treatments of some of the great Gene Wilder movies, Young Frankenstein and Blazing Saddles, broken down minute by minute. And then you also want to go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/The Wilder Ride, and follow us there. And then join our listeners group. A button will pop up. You just hit that button, answer 3 simple questions to make sure you're actually human. And then join our listeners group. No politics, no craziness. It's craziness, but not all that kind of mess. It's Gene Wilder craziness, entertainment, what's coming up on our show, information about past guests, future guests, and what they're up to, and just a lot of fun. So good break from crazy life stuff, and good place to just come stretch your legs every once in a while.
We're also on just about every podcatcher out there, whatever podcatcher you're using right now to listen to the show. If you are using one, use that share button, put it on social media, be part of our free and wonderful marketing engine out there, helping spread the word. And if you have an extra minute or two, maybe even drop us a review and a rating. We'd love that. We're also on YouTube, although no video, we do just audio, which throws a lot of people off, but we wanted to make sure we were on YouTube. A lot of people like to use that to just stream in the background of their desktop at work or wherever they may be. And we do have a Patreon page. If you want to support the show, got some great content out there, and you can support the show at any tier you'd like. And it'd be great for us to help keep the lights on and keep the show moving as we are winding down season 4 and already prepping for season 5. Other than that, Walt, until next week.
Until next week.
Come on back for another episode of the Wilder Ride Listeners Lounge. Man, Jim is just, what a great... He's
amazing.
Did you know I watched the timer. He went almost 14 and a half straight minutes without, I typed to you, I was like, well, you feel free to jump in with a question, assuming he doesn't take a breath. You're like, no breaths yet. Still no breaths. Keep going.
Well, the thing is, he could have kept going. The man has more knowledge about the Old West and Western movies and books and than anybody I know. And he really is one of those guys that I can just sit and listen to all night.
But that's the thing. There's a lot of people we know that have a lot of knowledge, but he can deliver it in a way that you just want to keep listening.
Yeah, and I think one of the great arts in all of history, but in Americana particularly, is the art of storytelling. Mm-hmm. And Jim has been blessed with that ability. So I'm so glad he came on. We may have to have him back next week.
I think so. The thing is, we can bring Jim on any one particular topic. We can bring him on and say, let's talk about the Western movie. Let's talk about wagon trains. Trains. We just waste an hour.